Well, thanks for joining us for this special Sunday Extra podcast. If you are listening to this, then you will notice that there is a huge change in our normal sound. We're on Zoom. We have just finished the Teaming in Marriage webinar with Dr. Nathan Lewis. And in that webinar, we were looking specifically at the first 4 heart attitudes. We've been in a message series called True to Real, looking at these core summary statements out of the Bible about how we're to live with one another and how to team together in ministry. We've been in a whole series of those. You can check out previous episodes from both our Sunday morning and our Sunday Extra to go in a little bit about deeper on those particular things. But we brought in Dr. Lewis to talk to our congregation through a Zoom webinar about how do these heart attitudes directly apply to marriage. And in that 90-minute webinar, we talked about the first 4, and we got comments back that was action-packed and we could really have gone in a lot deeper, and marriage is very complicated. So we could probably go on for a long time on just those first 4 heart attitudes. But Pastor Matt Sertivant and I wanted to have an extended conversation with Dr. Lewis about the other 3 heart attitudes and how they relate to marriage. So these would be heart attitudes 5 through 7. So thank you for being, excuse me, thank you for being a part of this extra conversation, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to continue the conversation. Dr. Lewis,
for those who aren't, oh, sorry, man. You go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
This is going to be fun.
This is fun.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, you no. I was thinking for those who weren't able to be part of the webinar and don't know Dr. Lewis, I didn't know if I'm just going to call you Nathan the rest of the time. That's okay.
Please do.
Could you tell us a little bit about your experience with Hope Church and the Heart Attitudes?
Yeah, I was, my wife and I came to Hope in 1981. We were part of Hope until 1991. We came from California and we moved back to California afterwards. And we've been married for 45 years, and we've been married for a little over 5 years when we first went to Hope, and struggling in our marriage at the time. And we really needed something very real and practical to help us turn things around in our marriage. And we were introduced to the Heart Attitudes, and that did the trick. Not, to be too flippant about it, but they, and no pun intended, they really got to the heart of the problem between my wife and I, and the constant conflict that we were having. And so for me, these are not academic. They are very real and have become a part of our marriage for the last 40 years. So.
Well, I know, like you, I haven't been married quite as many years as you have, but the Heart Attitudes have been foundational to my marriage as well. My wife and I, Jessica, we committed that this is how we were going to live. Essentially, as before we got married, we said this is just what we're going to build into our marriage. Well, we talked in the webinar about sort of the process of how the heart attitudes relate to our marriage. You mentioned heart attitude number 1 really lays the foundation. So putting the goals and interests of my spouse before my own. And then the next 3 heart attitudes really are about building up each other. And we talked about those in the webinar. You said the last 3 heart attitudes, which in the church context, we talk about teaming together in groups and teams and as an organization, how we relate. You referred to them as building up the marriage. So let's talk about that for a few minutes, starting with heart attitude number 5, participate in the ministry of the church. How do we translate that into our marriage?
Well, first of all, the building up the marriage is what I said about that third entity. And in some ways, you mentioned before that, um, we referred to the first heart attitude as the most important. It's the foundation. And then the other three as the most important because they are relational. I actually think that in some ways, I agree with that. And I've said that, I believe it. But in some ways, these last three are at least as important, if not more important, in this way. Because they direct us toward what is most important, and that is the marriage. So that's what these are about, is how do we get past, so the first three are 2 through 5 or 4 are about how do we get past ourselves to do for the other. These last three are how do we get past ourselves to do for the marriage. And if our goal is strengthening the marriage, then we do for each other. So we don't do for each other just to do for each other. We actually do for ourselves for the sake of the marriage. That the marriage is actually more important than both of us. So with that in mind, that heart attitude 5 in marriage is I'm going to be fully engaged in serving my spouse for the sake of the marriage. So why do we serve in the congregation? We serve because not for our sake, but for the building up of the body. That's what it says. So why do I serve my spouse? Why do we serve each other? For the building up of the marriage. It's not just the building up of each other. Now, the Bible does say building up one another, but then it also says building up the body. That this is Ephesians, which is why God gives people gifts to the congregation for the building up of the body. So it is serving with that in mind, if that makes sense. It's sacrificially submitting to one another for something that's bigger than both of us. Parenting comes in this. So we make, it's actually deciding also that as a couple, we're going to serve together. We're going to say, so getting past ourselves to do for one another is about, asking what is best for the other. Getting past ourselves to do for the marriage is asking what is best for the marriage. And in the one, we make personal sacrifices for the other. So we say no to things, not the least of which is we say no to men and women that are not our spouses. That's the essence of the I do. What people don't realize is when they say I do, they say I don't. At the same time, they say I don't to all kinds of things. So when they say yes to the marriage, they're saying no as a married couple to all kinds of other things. In other words, their life, their marriage is going to be about this, not about these things. People often say I do to each other, but they don't say I do to the marriage. I don't know if you're tracking this or not. I'm making sense, but that's what this is about.
Well, it's making me think of,
go ahead, Brian.
Me think of the thing that you did in the webinar with the figure skaters.
Yes.
That you've got, it was you have a pairs figure skating at the Olympics, and you've got a guy and a girl. Clearly, everybody can see that there's two people, but then as they are, with their training and their skill, they're working together, you see this other third thing that you can't like see, but it's there. You see the pair doing things that look very poetic or beautiful, or this is how this routine is supposed to go. I think what then you showed another one where they weren't working together, and there were crashes and bangs, and it was probably more I'm going after something that I want out of this routine that the other one's not ready for.
Yeah.
And that causes crashes and burns in the thing. So then you see the unity of that a figure skater couple fall apart. And I think at least that's what I'm getting out of this is there is a husband and wife in the relationship, but they're creating this third entity called the marriage. And you can also, that's something that other people, if it's done well, other people can see this third thing as you are working in unity. That's very beautiful to see. It's encouraging to see. It's inspiring to see. And that really is what the husband and wife are aiming at, is this picture of the relationship of Christ and the church lived out in between a man and a woman.
And you're exactly right. No, you're exactly right, Brian. I mean, that's why I use those videos for the very reason that you just, and in fact, I most often use that video at this point in the seminar, because people misunderstand the whole notion of leading and following and submitting, and they get all hung up on the different roles. And that's because they're paying attention to the individuals. But if you think of it as a dance, if you think of it as a dance, those things mean less. It's each one fulfilling their role in that dance because there's something more important than both of them. And that is the dance. And it's the dance that's being judged, the dance that's being viewed. So to put it more in practical terms, over time, as our marriage matures, people begin seeing less of Tina and less of Nathan, and they see more Nathan and Tina. That's the marriage, Nathan and Tina. They actually experience the marriage. They don't just experience us independently. They experience the marriage. And that marriage is bigger than both of us and requires both of us, but they experience the marriage either positively or negatively. And by the way, the first people that experience it and the ones who most experience it are the kids. They do. And this is why in family therapy we call the marriage, not we, but family theorists call the marriage the executive subsystem because it sets the tone for the rest of the family. That relationship shapes what the whole experience of the family is over time. It's that critical. So you're absolutely right about that.
Well, I think an interesting thing, Nathan, that I just thought about as you were describing that concept of seeing less of the individuals and experiencing, the couple. I can think about people who I've known for years, and I've known their marriage for years, and I just think of them that way. It's the couple. I also can think of people who they've been married maybe not that long at all, and maybe I knew them each individually, or I just knew one of the members of the couple and I didn't know the other. So early on in the marriage, I either think of them as individuals or the one that I had the previous relationship with, but I don't think of them so clearly like I would think of someone that I've experienced their marriage for years, and it's the couple. So it's almost a thing that subtly happens that without thinking about it, depending on how the marriage has been going and what people's experience is. So that's really fascinating, just how you laid that out.
Yeah, and it's also, think about it in the church, the Heart Attitude 5, serving one another. So let's say what I do in the church is help set up chairs. That's what I do. Well, if I'm doing that for what I get out of it, because it's my thing and I'm really good at it, and I'm not thinking about why I'm doing this. I'm not thinking about the overall vision and goal and purpose of the church. Then I am going to I'm going to approach that very differently. I'm going to approach it selfishly. I'm not going to like it when somebody tells me, the chairs need to be set up this way, and it doesn't make any sense to me. There was a guy who was a brand new Christian, and in our church, he was helping set up chairs. And I was leading that team at the time, and he kept saying, in the Catholic Church, we did this. In the Catholic Church, we did this. In the Catholic Church, we did this. Any idea what his background was? But anyway, he and I, very trying not to be irritated, but very patiently trying to help him see there's a bigger picture here. There's a reason why we do this. And so the first Sunday he was doing it, during the last song or before the first song started, after the message, he started picking chairs up. He just started picking them up while the service was still going. So we had to say, no. There's a bigger picture here. Well, this is what people do in marriage. They have their idea of what they want out of marriage, and they're not working together as a team here because they don't see the bigger picture, that there's something more important than both of them. So I serve in my marriage. I serve my wife, and she serves me, and we both cooperate together for the sake of the marriage and the family, because that's more important than both of us.
Very good. What about heart attitude number 6 is support the work financially? Again, we talk about that in the church context, and it might be easy to think about, if they're in a dual income family, you're working to support the family, or if mom stays home with the kids and dad works, dad's supporting. But how does that really help to build up a marriage?
Well, I think that it seems like it doesn't translate really well, but I think it translates almost exactly, because what's the purpose of contributing financially to the church? It is contributing to the welfare of the mission. And so let's expand the contribution beyond financial contribution, because money represents time and energy and effort and decisions and values, what we do with that money. So it's not your money, my money, it's our money. That's part of in the marriage. So it is contributing to the welfare of the mission of our marriage. It's that we are both invested at a level of sacrifice. So we're all in with doing that. It's that mentality of whatever it takes. We're going to do what it takes. This is what it takes. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. You're going to do whatever it takes. We do whatever it takes together in order to make this work. So I think it has everything also to do with things that have to be done in the house. By the way, this is how the children most experience the marriage, is through these last 3 heart attitudes. Because they're learning to contribute also. So we're giving them a vision for something that's bigger than themselves and bigger than the family. So we're not only contributing, so the heart attitude 5, we're not only serving each other in the marriage, the marriage itself is serving. So as a marriage, we serve. As a marriage, we help other people. And we hope our marriage is a blessing. Same thing with this. We're contributing to the welfare of other people, not only in the marriage, but as a family. We're doing it financially. We're doing it in terms of stuff that we have, time and energy, giving to helping people in whatever way we can. But it's about managing our resources and prioritizing them according to what our marriage is all about. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
How that translates?
Yeah, I think it was interesting when you said this is how children experience the marriage, because there's a lot of heart attitude number 1 through 4 that may happen behind closed doors, that is appropriately happening away from the children.
Yeah.
In my family, if my wife and I were to, you know, be harsh with each other in front of the kids, or need to clear up a relationship that the kids experience the sin, we want to make sure we do that in front of them. But there's a lot of things my wife and I are talking about when the kids are not in the room. So I think that's just a really interesting thing to think about. I had never thought about that before, that most of 1 through 4 maybe happens privately, but it's really 5, 6, and 7 that the children are experiencing. And I like what you just said about managing the resources and the priorities according to what the marriage is all about.
And if you stop and think about it, the Bible actually makes a direct connection between that and leadership in the church, when it says that elders are to be able to manage their home. And I have a friend who puts it this way: if it ain't working in the home, don't export it to the church. And so think about it. Think about it this way, okay? When I give money to the church, depending on where I'm at in relationship to the core leadership, which are the decision makers, I may not have a clue what happens to that money. So I'm no longer attached to it directly. Not so in the family. I am the decision maker. My wife and I are the decision makers in this. We see the money, we see the budget, we see the time, we see the needs that are there. We face it every day. So this hard attitude is even experienced and felt more in the home than it is in the congregation, because I'm not just doing a drive-by. I'm not just throwing money at it and then doing my thing. I'm heavily invested in this. And it's very important that one person doesn't take, this is where unity is extremely important, that one spouse doesn't use their particular contribution to wield power and abuse power and influence because they're contributing more than the other. No, this is a team. This is my money's your money. This is our marriage. And we don't measure it with money. It's not measured by money. It's measured by all kinds of other things as well that contribute to the welfare of the family. This is why when you're training kids, I think it's better when a kid does the dishes. And I think kids very early on need to start learning to do things to contribute and being told that this helps the family. Rather than saying, oh, good job. You might say that. Rather than saying that, say, this really helps out. This helps out tremendously. Because you're teaching them that there is something bigger than themselves that they are part of, that they're contributing to. It starts having that attitude and understanding with the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So you started off the webinar with some math issues. which I, being very math weak, this was a good place for me to start with all these math questions. But it seems like it's easy in today's culture to get into, well, it's a 50-50 arrangement between a husband and a wife. You take half the responsibilities, I take half the responsibilities. Or if I'm super holy, I'm going to take all 100% and you take all 100%, and we're mutually on each other's team, and we can kind of move things together. But when it comes to this, it seems like what really happens is there's a crunch time for me, and then there's at a different time a crunch time for my wife, or there's a crunch time for the kids, and it's not this, like, it's this shifting morass of responsibility. Can you talk a little bit about that level of teaming, where it's kind of got it's like the bicycle illustration of, you kind of lean to one side for a while, and then it's got to lean to the other side to kind of keep moving. Yeah. It's not a static, well, I'm going to do all of this, you do all of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where the dance comes in also. So you think about how when he picks her up in the air, well, he's having to exert a whole lot more energy than her at that point. I mean, he is. Okay, he's holding her up. I mean, he's doing something. And then once he lets go of her and she spins, it's all her.
Right, right.
And so you see that. You see him, when he's lifting her up, you're actually looking at him, I would assume. Because, oh my gosh, wow. I'm hoping she doesn't fall. And if she falls, it's on him. Okay? Literally on him.
Right.
But then once he releases her, we're looking at her. We're not looking at him. We don't care about what he's doing, because she's doing she spins, then she nails it. If she doesn't nail it, it's on her. But it required both of them doing that together. So maybe that's not like the bicycle that you're talking about, but it does kind of illustrate that the dance is not always the same. There are times when we focus on one more than the other, but it's still about the dance. And what happens when couples forget that is they start like that, the one where they fell, said she's not happy. Mm-hmm. Well, we have no idea why that happened, but clearly she was blaming him, and he seemed to be blaming himself too, in the way that he was looking like, well, that was stupid. But they still have to come back and perform again. And so they got to figure out how to work through that and work together, because it's still about the dance.
Right.
Now I'm metaphorically answering your question, so I don't know if I'm really answering your question.
Well, I think that, I was thinking in terms of, you want to be fully invested in using your time, your money, your energy, all of that to make that it's not going to look the same.
That's correct.
In all seasons, that there will be a time when, it's, like I can imagine, working on staff at a church, we have come to know after around 19 years of marriage that Easter is just a crunch time for the schedule. And so we kind of shift the kids' responsibilities and what to expect of my schedule, because Easter is important for the kingdom, it's important for work, and so we shift for that. But then when it's the launch of the school year, there's a shift towards, well, let's work on the kids and let's make sure that it's just this, but I think it'd be still simple to say, or easy to get into without thinking that that's what you're doing. It's still I'm going to take care of my part, you're going to take care of your part, and we're going to work towards this third thing, but those responsibilities shift over time. It's not a static set of responsibilities, I guess.
Yep. No, you're exactly right about that. And there's an ebb and flow to life. And and what happens is we get caught up in those changes and forget to be intentional about the relationship. So we're all experiencing that with with the lockdowns, with the COVID lockdowns, is we've been forced to make changes, uh, and quite often, just life forces us to make changes, and we have to be intentional about that. There, families that don't really make it refuse to make those changes. This is what we refer to as the family life cycle. As the relationship grows, kids grow, everything, and things change. We get older, and our bodies stop doing what they used to be able to do, and we're constantly adapting. And so what we were doing before no longer works for what is now required. But we get in these ruts and fail to make those changes and end up neglecting. It's the marriage is one of the first things that goes. The easiest thing to let go.
I think that's another key thing to point out again. What you said just a moment ago is that we've got to constantly be adapting, and sometimes we get stuck in the rut, and either we don't recognize the rut, and we have to become aware before we can start to make changes, which is an advantage of having other people in our lives. But probably sometimes the harder thing to do is, I like the rut. The rut feels good.
Yes,
I don't want to change. But if I don't change, at some point, there's the pain of changing, or there's the pain of not changing. And
That's
whatever the greater pain is we want to do the one with less pain at some point. So
yes,
that family life cycle and changing, especially given the world we're living in right now. I mean, all kinds of families, marriages that there's change being forced upon us that maybe we want or don't want. And if we don't adapt to some of the change and then be intentional and saying, in the middle of this change, here's what we are going to do so we can stay on focus and on mission. This, we can go back to having to clear up relationships, because that's where some of the conflict and things can come out of. So anyway, I think what you just said about that is really, really important and timely for the world that we're living in right now.
And it's interesting because the way that I'm wired, I always think that things are going to stay the same. And I'm always surprised when they don't. I always thought I would be living in the house I was, our last house that we were in before we moved to this one. We were in it for 20 years. I thought, we're always going to be here. And then lo and behold, we're not, and I'm surprised. Anyway, but it's a reminder to me that things do not stay the same. They just don't. That's part of life.
Yeah, let's move on to the last heart attitude. The way we talk about it here at Hope Church is follow spiritual leadership within scriptural limits. One of the things we're going to be doing in the final wrap-up message of the series, which we've not yet done at the time of this recording, is we're going to be talking about how they all build upon each other, and they end with this one. So the foundation is putting the goals and interests of others above my own, leading all the way up to heart attitude number 7. And again, we can probably think about, there's a husband and there's a wife, and the husband does have spiritual leadership, but maybe we don't think as much as we should about how this one translates into our marriage. So how does this really work itself out in our marriage and building up the marriage itself?
Yeah, this has to do with the roles that have been assigned husband and wife. And people get all twisted up about the word submission. So I think a good way to think about that, again, is to go back to those Olympic skaters. Whenever I show that video for the first time to a group of people, the first question I ask them after I show it to them, Those are the gold medal winners. Is okay, who was leading and who was following? And they don't know. But here's the thing. Somebody was leading and somebody was following. He was leading and she was following. That is always true in the dance. The Olympic dance is what I'm talking about, the ice skating. He's leading and she's following. But she wasn't getting all worked up about him leading until the next video where he failed to lead. Or he led in the wrong.
Are you saying that people can't answer that? You're saying that people can't answer that question because when they see it, they see the routine. They're not seeing the following and the
exactly,
leading?
Exactly. Because they don't. Yeah, because they're not asking that question, who's leading and who's following, when they first see it. They're just seeing the dance, which is very interesting because when they don't think to ask who's leading and who's following. But clearly, in order for them to make it work, they have to agree that somebody's leading and somebody's following. And by the way, it requires them both to fulfill that role. And I think it's and they're both difficult. That's another thing that we don't think about. So when we take our eyes off the dance and we start thinking about ourselves in it, because he is required to lead, the husband is required to lead like Christ leads the church, lays down his life with a strong sense of purpose and a sacrificial, loving heart and desire to please God. That's how he's supposed to lead. Who wants to do that? I mean, who thinks that's easy? It's not easy. It's tough. I would far rather Tina take the lead on that. She needs me to take the lead on that. So and I can also lift her. She can't lift me. Now, this is metaphorical, okay? Meaning God has wired me as a man and as a husband to bear the weight of responsibility. That's what I mean by lifting her up. So as she doesn't, in the dance that you saw, she doesn't lift him up. He lifts her up. He doesn't spin around. She spins around. But she has to follow his lead in order for that to work. Now, that's really what submission is about. And in the other thing that you find in Ephesians 5, where it's the whole passage about wives submit to their husbands, wives obey their husbands, and it's about following their lead. It also commands them to submit to one another. And so I think submission to one another is about the dance. And then there's specific roles in their dance, and I think that's what the leading and following are about. But it still requires them he has to, in leading her, he has to submit to her, following. And in following him, she has to submit to his leadership. But it's that mutuality that they are going for. And women naturally, see, this is the thing that was damaged at the fall. Because God created men to move in the world and take responsibility. And that's what God cursed after he fell. And women were created more for relationship, and they're much more easily hurt. And so when they fell, that's what God cursed with her. He cursed two things. He cursed her relationship to her husband, said, your desire will be for him, and he will rule over you. And what that means is that she's going to have difficulty letting him lead. He's going to have difficulty assuming responsibility. And so they both want to advocate that, by forcing the other into a different role to make theirs easier. So she wants to take over and control it to make sure she's okay. He wants to abdicate his responsibility and let her lead. But what ends up happening is that second video that I showed in the webinar, which is where in the dancing, the Olympic dancing, where they both fall. That's what it looks like. That's what the marriage looks like when they are not both fulfilling their role. And when they do, it's something beautiful and attractive. And I think it's also abused. He can abuse his leadership, and she can abuse her following by not taking. She can do it by not taking any responsibility, putting it all on him, and trying to, I will follow you exactly where I want you to go. And he abuses his by assuming an authority that God didn't give him to force her to do things that are ungodly. So it goes both ways. It goes by and both of them are a failure to understand fully. So two things: they're making it about themselves rather than about the marriage, and then they misunderstand what those roles are. So they're not together, and the dance doesn't work.
That's really helpful. And I think especially one of the things we talk about when we talk about the leadership in terms of the church is, I think this is compounded by the fact of being independent Americans. We don't understand leadership, and we don't see it exactly the way maybe other cultures do, because that rugged individual who's out for their own, that's sort of the picture culturally of what everyone sees. And leaders are turkeys, and leaders don't really know what's going on, and just the way things are portrayed most often in the media and in the movies. But one of the realities, this is just how God wired the universe. He's the one that instituted leadership. He's the one that instituted spiritual leadership. Mm-hmm. He instituted the family, and he put that same system in the family. And when we actually work the way that God created the system, things just go so much better, and there's so much blessing really when we do that. I don't want to end on a negative note, but I do want I want to ask this question of, you work with training counselors. You've trained counselors for a number of years. You've done some counseling yourself, either professionally or I know in the context of the church that you are a part of. You do a lot of coaching, counseling. This is, the heart attitudes are the way that God has created things. We get these principles from his word. Can you talk about just when we don't do it this way, which comes so naturally to us? What are some of the big problems that we run into? And again, I don't want to just totally go down the negative road, but if we live life God's way, life goes so much better. But if we don't, then we can experience some problems. So maybe just a couple of things to watch out for. Where have you seen the hardest one of these hard attitudes for people to live in their marriages?
I would just say in general, people, so when a couple asks for my help, the assumption that I have is that they're not working together. Because they have conflict, that is, they're asking for my help because they have, in some way or another, they're not working together. They're actually working against each other. And that comes out in, that is usually expressed, and so they come to me quite often like I am the judge, and I'm going to make a decision about which one is right. and they come and they present their case against the other one. Why the other one is blowing it and why they need to change. They need to stop what they're doing and they need to do what I want them to do. And they both present their case, and then I'm supposed to make a decision. One of the things that I say to them is something that they're not doing, is I want you guys to understand that I am for both of you individually, but more than that, I am for your marriage. And I'm actually more for your marriage right now than you guys are. And that's what's happening here. You guys are working against each other now because you are working for your own agenda, whatever that is. And that always results in some kind of discontent, a lack of fulfillment of needs that they have. They're not getting their needs met. And there's a reason for that, because if they're not working together as a team, they're not meeting each other's needs. It's not happening. So what do? They're going to look elsewhere for those needs to be met. Now, they're going to do that either emotionally, or they're going to do that in other ways, relationally, or they may do that with activity. But they're going to look outside of the marriage to have those needs met. That's what's going to happen. And that then will reduce the anxiety that they have in that relationship. And so they're not going to be as motivated to work on it. And so they establish the habit of not depending on each other and the marriage to meet those needs. And so they drift apart. Sometimes it's kids, by the way. Sometimes they focus on their parenting, either independently or even together. This is the one thing that brings them together, but they're not working on the marriage together. And it feels like everything is okay. And then they, in the marriage, and really they've just settled for less than. But they're satisfied in the kids. And then lo and behold, the kids grow up and they leave. And now they're stuck with each other. And now it begins to reveal the consequences of years of neglect. But in the meantime, resentment can build up, frustration and resentment, and then resigning. Now, that's if the marriage makes it that long. Quite often it doesn't, because that becomes a source of conflict. And then there are levels of conflict. 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can think about this in terms of alarms. 1 alarm, 2 alarm, 3 alarm, 4 alarm, where it heats up. This is a 4-alarm fire. And it's very interesting because one of the things that happens at stage 3 conflict is they stop fighting because they start to give up. It's a learned helplessness. Think about what's happening right now with COVID. People are actually starting to kind of give up. It's a little bit of learned helplessness. They stopped resisting the lockdowns. Maybe that's a bad analogy. I don't know, but that's what happens. It's a learned helplessness. It's like, oh, well, nothing I do is going to matter. So then they just settle in and settle for less, and they can ride that for a very long time if their needs are being satisfied in other ways. And I've seen this happen many, many times, and it eventually catches up somehow. Matt, I want to make sure I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Can you quickly? I don't want to totally take us in a different direction, but you mentioned 4 levels. Could you tell us what level 1, 2, and 4 look like?
Well, I'm going to have to do this from memory here, but I think I can do it. So level 1 is about incidences, stuff, things. Okay, somebody does something you don't like, and you get in an argument, and there's conflict there, and that can be resolved. All right. But if that doesn't get resolved, then level 2 conflict is we start attacking each other personally. We attack each other's motives and intents. So now it's not just about things and circumstances and small grievances that occur, like I didn't like the way she talked to me or something like that, and so I snap at her and now it's about we attack each other's character. That's level 2. Now we're going after each other's character. Okay. And then level 3 is we attack the relationship. We attack the marriage. We start questioning it. One person starts thinking, you know what? I don't know if I want to be in this relationship. I want to, resentment builds over time. Things don't get resolved. There's deep wounds, deep hurts. And at least one person starts entertaining either the thought of an affair, if it hasn't occurred already, or how do I get out of this marriage? And then level 4 is somebody has actually started making plans to get out. And quite often at level 3 and beginning level 4, that's when they stop fighting. And so a lot of times for one of the spouses, they think, okay, everything's okay now, not knowing that this other person is actually planning to exit. And so they're kind of surprised when that happens. I'm actually experiencing that right now with a couple. And it turns out, people are surprised, oh my gosh, they're getting divorced. But it turns out there's been a history here. And you can just see that level 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can just see those stages. And she's done. She's just done. So that's what happens, I believe, if these hard attitudes are not practiced. It just goes to that. Now, there's still hope for people in level 4. But by the time they get to level 3, professionals give them about a 50-50 chance of surviving, of the marriage surviving. And so it drops way down at level 4 when someone actually has a plan. But to give you some hope, I've actually had people in professional counseling at level 4 who have already filed for divorce. And I actually had one couple who they came in one day, and this is after months of seeing them when they decided to try to make it work. And they were laughing and said, what are you guys laughing? I said, we're divorced. I said, what? I said, we forgot to stop it. Now, they're definitely level 4. So I said, well, what are you guys going to do? They said, well, our anniversary is in 2 weeks. So we're going to get remarried on our anniversary. We thought it'd be easier that way. And they did. We got remarried. So even level 4, there's hope. That's my point.
That's good.
But, the chances go way down that marriage is going to survive because they don't believe, at least one of them does not believe there's any hope. It's that there's any way that the other one is going to change enough for them. Now, it's really both of them, but in order to justify leaving, one of them who takes the initiative to do that has to make it more about the other than about them, typically.
Well, Nathan, this has been so helpful, both the webinar that we had a little earlier and this extended conversation as we are taking a look at the last 3 hard attitudes. I want to just ask you, in general, when you think about the 7 hard attitudes related to marriage, any final thoughts that you would like to share? And then I'll let Brian wrap us up after that. But thank you so much for your time today.
No, this has been really a pleasure for me, and glad to share these things. And my hope is that people would actually do these things. They're the one another's. What the Bible teaches about the one another. And it's really interesting because it is the biblical love language. So it's really perplexing to me how easily drawn toward alternative theories and systems than what the Bible teaches. These are so practical. God, out of his grace, revealed these to us. It's like he's saying, guys, I'm going to show you how to do this. You don't have to struggle. I'm going to show you how to do this. And then somebody comes up with love languages. Okay, which I see, there's a lot of good things in there, but I think it should have been written how I preferred to be treated language, which is the opposite of Heart Attitude 1. And there have been many times when I've had a couple in front of me and I just challenge them to start practicing the one another's. They know nothing about the heart attitudes. So I said, well, here's a list of the one another's in the Bible. Choose some of these and start doing it. And they do. And what a difference it makes for them. In other words, these things work. It's not why you do them, but they actually work. And they work better than anything, any alternative. Now, those things can help us, but this is part of how God designed reality. I also believe they're part of the gospel. This is a practical fleshing out of the good news. It's good news. God shows how to have unity again with each other, our spouses, and all the blessings that come out of that. So those are my final thoughts.
Well, thanks again for your time. I'm looking at the time of this recording, and we spent about as much time on the last three as we did the first four. There just really is a lot to dig into, and so I thank you for the focused study and attention that you put on this. I know it's part of your training to apply that, but I think all of us have really benefited from all of this. And I think some of the takeaways I have from this is that the success of the marriage, really, it's a choice. There's not an inevitability for the failure. I'm choosing intentionally to work at this third thing, this dance, this marriage thing. And if you are watching or listening to this and you're in the Fort Worth area, I would encourage you to come by Hope Church. There's a couple of ways that you can kind of see this lived out, and one is just show up to a church service. These 7 heart attitudes are at the core of who we've been as a church since we started in 1978. And so a lot of families and individuals at Hope Church are intentionally trying to live this out and do these one another's and with one another and inside their family. So if you want to get a flavor of what this looks like in real life, come to church on a Sunday. If you've been coming around and you're like, I know what Dr. Lewis said, and I think it's helpful, but I really want to see other marriages at a closer level, then I would really encourage you to get involved in a group and get involved either in a men's group, a women's group, or a group on marriage. And then you can ask those questions and see other husbands and other wives and listen to their prayer requests and kind of hear how this works in their marriage. And I think there really is hope, as you mentioned, Nathan. For it doesn't matter where your marriage is, there is hope in Christ to keep this moving in a way so that the enemy's ultimate goal of division is not what happens, that God's ultimate goal of unity is really what has happened. So thanks for watching or listening to this, and we will see you next time.